I'm going to make into the introduction so and prayer before you put up this. We can see anything when that is up. There's only 11 people on it. Well, you want to suggest when it's 5 o'clock.
June, your mic is on.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Lugist, and I'm the Education Officer for District 6. Welcome to this consultation on the development of a special needs education policy. Before we proceed with the discussion and the consultation, I would like to invite Mrs. Ambrose begin with a word of prayer. Over to Ms. Ambrose.
Good evening, everyone. Let's just compose ourselves for prayers. Heavenly Father, we thank you this evening for this opportunity where we can reach out to those around us with special needs. I thank you, God, for our facilitators. I pray, God, for wisdom. I pray, God, that your spirit would be our guide this evening. I pray that, Lord, whatever we discuss, we will do it in an agreeable manner. And Father, at the end of it all, it will be to your glory and to your honor. It will be to the benefit of the students among us who deserve special care, special attention. I pray your blessings upon each one of us, every person who is part of this consultation, and may your favor and grace rest upon us. This I ask in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
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 Thank you very much, Mrs. Ambrose. Once more, welcome to the consultation on special needs education policy and strategy. Special welcome to our consultants, Dr. Dion Edward Kerr and Dr. Joan Spencer Hernandez. Today, we'll be consulting with stakeholders in Districts 6 and District 5. The purpose of this consultation is to engage with a wide range of stakeholders in order to create a framework that addresses the diverse needs of individuals with disabilities, learning differences, and unique challenges. Further, this initiative will ensure inclusivity, equity, and support for individuals with special needs within our community. We encourage you to share your thoughts, ideas, concerns, and recommendations throughout this consultation process. Your contributions will make a difference in shaping the future of special needs policy and strategy. I now hand you over to our consultants, Dr. Dion Edward and Dr. Joe Spencer Hernandez. Thank you, and I hand over to our consultants so that we could proceed with today's deliberations. Over to you.
You're muted. You're muted.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and taking the time to participate in what we hopefully will be a fruitful discussion and provide us with insights from your perspectives. I'm Dion Edwards Kerr, and my colleagues online are Joan Spencer Hernandez and Kathy Depperdine, my apologies, but they can go ahead and introduce themselves. Both Joan and I are based at the University of the West Indies, the School of Education, and the Joint Board of Teacher Education, but they can take it from here and introduce themselves.
Okay, good evening, all. I am Joan Spencer Hernandez. I am a special educator by profession. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of the West Indies and the manager of the Joint Board of Teacher Education. So this is an area that is really very special to me, and happy to be here to share with you today. Kathy?
Good evening, everyone. I am Kathy Depredine, attached to the South Louis Community College. I currently serve as the head of the Modern Language Learning Unit and a teacher educator. I am heavily involved in educational research, particularly that which affects policy development, and I look forward to this evening's discussions.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, we're going to start off, try to keep the presentation as tight as possible. So we're going to start with just sharing an outline. The presentation is actually in two parts. The background, which I will present, and the policy and strategic goals, which both Joan and Kathy will present. Now, the idea is to be sure that we can get this done in good time so that we have enough space for persons to ask questions and to add their comments. And we're going to ask you to be as candid and as forthright as possible, both in your questions and in your comments, because these will help to refine this policy. These will help to sharpen anything that might not be on point for the context and the situation in St. Lucia. And so we're asking you as a special favor to be as open as possible in your questioning and in your comments. Okay. So let's start from the perspective of what the objectives of the terms of reference were and what we were asked to do. So fundamentally, as you can see, we were asked to prepare a gender-sensitive special education needs policy, a national policy. And the objective of that, from the point of view of the government of St. Lucia, is really to transform the education system in order to make it responsive to the needs of all children. And it's important that we focus on all, because all really means all, regardless of their abilities, regardless of where they're from. It really means all. And this actually comes out of the idea that all children have the right entitled to a quality education. And St. Lucia, being very much aware of that, is really trying to chart its pathway to ensuring that the system is transformed to be able to respond to all children. Now, as I said, our specific remit was to prepare a gender-sensitive policy and strategy to provide the best options for educating children with special needs in the least restrictive environment. Now, this last term, least restrictive environment, my colleague Joan will speak to in detail later. But one of the things I want to highlight is the issue of what gender sensitive really means. Now, on the spectrum of dealing with gender, from being
We lost you, Dion.
and so the idea of gender sensitivity is the notion of awareness, and a sense that we are aware that there are some situations, and most situations, in which boys and girls, male and females, experience it differently. And so what we've attempted to do in following the definition of gender sensitivity according to UNESCO, is to ensure that all the data was disaggregated in terms of male and female. So we understood male, female, and female dropout from school and retention we saw those patterns that emerged from that data. So it's important to highlight this, that throughout, the aim is, because the focus is on inclusivity, the aim is to ensure that all children, male, female, and wherever they are in life, are able to receive from this policy. So, of course, this aligns with the government's strategic mandate to ensure that the system of education is improved and children have pathways, quality pathways, that can make them productive citizens. Now, the policy issue really is that the fact that there are gaps in the system, that there are barriers to learning that arise when learning needs in the classroom are not met, and that learning needs stem from a range of factors. And you'll notice here and throughout the conversation, we use SEND rather than SEN. And the addition of SEND is the recognition that the range of factors that make children vulnerable are beyond disabilities and include the list of things that are here: impairments, psychosocial disturbances, differences in abilities, life experiences, deprivation, negative attitudes, inflexible curriculum, inaccessible or unsafe environments, policies and legislation, and education managers and teachers' lack of skills or inappropriate skills. It is on the basis of this. This is what the policy issue really is. It is St. Lucia's recognition that all children, again, the word all, need educational support, and this support should be an integral part. It should be embedded in the school system. And by all, we mean all children, from the profoundly disabled to those who are superiorly gifted and talented. And that's really what all means. It's the gamut of all the needs, all the abilities, all the circumstances that affect children's lives and put them at risk. So in terms of our approach, we took a two-prong approach. Basically, we conducted a desk review. So that desk review included a review of all the documents related to education, particularly the Education Act, the draft special needs policy that has been in draft for some time, and of course, the analysis of statistical data that would show us what school outcomes have been over several number of years. And we also, as an important part of this, conducted 5, well, I say consultative meetings here, but they were really interviews, in-depth, semi-structured interviews that allowed us to get the viewpoints of parents, the students themselves across the districts, principals, executives in the ministry, the special education officers, special educators, NGOs, the teachers union, the principals union, and various organizations like the St. Lucia Blind Welfare. And this allowed us to conduct the policy analysis that now form the basis of this policy. So here, why this is here. This is saying that we've not pulled these ideas out of our head, or we've just, applied some kind of academic notion to this. The policy is evidence-based. It's based on the research that we've conducted. We've heard from people. We're coming back to you again. Having heard from you, having written the policy, we are now back to you to say, is this what it should look like? So that's the purpose of this meeting, really. Have we caught it? And so that's why we need to hear from you. So in terms of stakeholders, the stakeholders' main concern were the gaps in terms of service delivery for children and our young people, our high school students, our primary and our high school students who needed services that would allow them to learn in that least restrictive environment that Joan will talk about. And least restrictive meaning most enabling, the place where they can actually learn, the place where their needs can be met. And so our stakeholders highlighted that there were gaps in the curriculum, in intervention programs, in assessment, in accountability and support services, that there were gaps in appropriate placement options. So things that Joan will speak to this again, things around there are some children in special schools who really don't belong there. The long wait times for assessment, the long wait times for interventions, qualified special educations. So those are some of the things that came up in the policy analysis. And I recall that across all the secondary schools where we met with, and the children, particularly I recall the secondary school children being quite vocal about the fact that the curriculum and the instruction for students with SEN was not suitable for them, particularly to help them to transition from secondary school to further education or to work. And so there were gaps in basically skills training and gaps in the school to work transition. In terms of the desk review, we learned that and saw in the analysis of the Education Act that although St. Lucia was a signatory to the several conventions, which we'll point it to later, that in truth and in fact, the act wasn't fully aligned with the core idea in some of those conventions. And moreover, that although a draft policy exists, it wasn't backed up by the legislation, and so it didn't really give it any teeth to work. So we are hoping that this policy will have some teeth. So what else did we find out? We found out that the special education unit did not have a multidisciplinary team, specifically in relation to how that's defined within the industry. So the need for a clinical psychologist, an occupational therapist, a physiotherapist, and all these experts who can assess the children and provide the kind of intervention they need. In addition, the referral process, although it exists, was not as clear for some people as we would expect. In addition, in terms of school outcomes, when we looked at the statistical data, we realized that over time, some children fell out of the system for one reason or the other, because there are several things that can make them special. Several of them repeated. There's quite a high level of repetition at the primary school level, K, grade 1, and grade 3. And I can see grade 3 because we saw that from as early as MST2, the MST2 results, we could see that their children, when we follow those children from grade 2 and into secondary school, we realized that the results that we then see in secondary actually started in MST2. So in truth and in fact, those are some of the gaps we have to plug in terms of ensuring that the children get the kind of remediation that they need very early. And this is something that both Joan and Kathy will talk about, early identification and how that is done and who does it, and how that can help the children. So what are the guiding principles? We spoke earlier, or rather I said earlier, that St. Lucia was signatories to several international conventions. They're also signatories and owners of several regional policy frameworks. So for example, they're signatory to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that dictates that every single child has the right to a quality education, regardless of background, regardless of ability, and especially now that relates to the Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities. And the fact that every child who has any kind of disability has the right to an education, right? Of course, the SDGs, the Strategic Development Goals of 2020, and the focus again on improving quality education and providing an education system that is included. Regionally, the CARICOM Human Resources Development Strategy and the OECS Education Strategy are the 5 things that underpinned, that guided our analysis, and we drew from in order to provide a framework that we will now present. So I'm going to pause here and ask for any questions and answers and any comments. Anyone? The floor is open. Okay, we have one hand up, and I'm quite timid, I must say, in any French pronunciations or otherwise. So I'm just going to ask you to go ahead and speak.
Okay, it's not French really, it's just pronounced Cleofa, just as it's spelled.
Okay. No problem.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
But you
Okay.
understand my vulnerability.
Absolutely, absolutely, not a problem. Okay, so yes, earlier you mentioned inflexible curriculum
Yes.
as one of the key issues. I think sometimes also inflexible assessment methods and tools are used.
Yes.
And I can share with you a personal experience where that is concerned.
Yes.
When my son was about 4, well, I mean, he's a university student now. He's one semester away from graduating. But when he was 4 years old, unlike his sisters, he wasn't speaking very clearly. His sisters, by the time they were 2.5, 3, they could speak fluently. But for him, it was a little bit different. So the pediatrician said to me when she was doing the assessment, prior to him going to grade K, when she did the assessment, I observed that the questions that she was asking him when she was gathering the the data, one of the questions she asked him was, she knocked on the front door of her office. She knocked on the front door, which was made of wood, and she said, David, what is this? So he said, a door. She said, no, that's not the answer I'm looking for. She knocked on, there was a cupboard door in her office. She knocked on that. That was also made of wood. She said, what is this? He repeated, a door. And for me, I'm listening to the pediatrician and I'm thinking to myself, well, that would have been my answer. And based on that, she decided that there was an issue. My son needed to go to the Donatus School for further assessment. So she said to my husband and I, he's not giving me answers that I'm looking for. I said, what answer were you looking for? She said, I was looking for wood. And I'm thinking to myself, this is an intelligent person. But anyway, so she gave us the referral card and so on. We went to the Donatus School. We had, my son did the person who was there at the time did the assessment. And we were asked to come back again, okay? Because I listened to the questions that, were used, to conduct the assessment. And some of these were so stringent. It's like they were not willing to, to bend a little, to try something else. It wasn't until when we went, I think it was a third time, we met this Australian speech and language therapist. She was doing her master's at the time, and she was in St. Lucia. I guess she was working on her thesis or whatever. But my son, she met with my son, and my husband and I were in the room, and she asked my son, how many sisters? She said, how many sisters do you have at home? And my son said, none. So she looked at myself and my husband, because we have 2 daughters. So he said none. Then she looked at my husband and myself, with a concerned look on her face. She said, who's Stephanie? So my son said, my sister. She said, who's Chelsea? My son answered, my sister. She said, but David, you just told me you have no sisters at home. And anyway, I guess she was a little tired too. She, in fairness to her, she had probably seen a lot of kids. So she started flipping through. She looked a little frustrated, and she was, flipping through, other cards, I guess, looking for other questions and so on. And my son, who was not shy at all, he got up. He touched her arm. She said, excuse me, miss. Today is Tuesday. My sisters are both at school. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. And she didn't really catch on to that. She was still flicking through her papers, and she said, "Okay, that's nice, David." And she was flicking, and she said, halfway through, she said, "Wait a minute." She said, "Today is Tuesday. My sisters are both at school," and she repeated it again. And she said, "Wait a minute. You are right, David. I did say." How many sisters do you have at home? I asked how many at home. And then, she questioned him a little further and so on. But bottom line is by the time she was done questioning my son, she realized that, and she actually admitted that. She said, there is nothing wrong with this child. We have just been asking him the wrong questions. She said he's paid close attention to detail. So the fact that I said at home, his sisters are at school. So he doesn't have any sisters at home. So, and then she continued to question him and so on. And my goodness, for months after that, after he did not have to go back there, because that was the last session, he wanted to go back there to play with there was a big yellow ball that the two of them were bouncing up and down on. He wanted to go back there. But, long story short, the inflexibility also lies within the assessment methods and tools that we use. And that could be a little bit dangerous. Okay, thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, definitely.
Let me to respond, yeah?
Yes, go ahead, Joan, please.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Mom. Yes, that's one of the areas that we are looking at, because we recognize, and it's a wonderful example that you just gave, because we have to be more agile, flexible. We have to make sure that the items are culturally relevant, that they're on point, and so on. So one of the things that you will see later as we talk about what we are recommending is that we examine very carefully the instruments that we are using to label youngsters and to place them in different kinds of programs. So thank you for that.
Very welcome.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can take one more comment or question before we move on.
All right, let's go
Okay,
on.
we're going to move on. Thank you. So over to Joan and Kathy for the second part of the presentation.
Thank you, Dion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to start with sharing with you the overall policy goal and the 6 policy components attached to the policy goal. If you look at the diagram, you will see that access to quality inclusive education is at the heart of everything that we're doing. Yes. So the overall policy goal is that inclusion is systemic, and learners with special education needs and disabilities have access to high quality, appropriate education to meet their individual needs. Now, what do we mean by special education needs and disabilities? As Dion had mentioned earlier, we're looking at children with disabilities, and there are roughly about 14 or so categories. And those are the ones that you'll be pretty much aware of, such as children with on the autism spectrum. We have specific learning disabilities like children with dyslexia and difficulty learning to read, dyscalculia, difficulty learning mathematical concepts, and so on. There are those children with emotional problems, behavior disorders, physically disabled, children who may be visually impaired or auditorily impaired. So the blind, the deaf, hearing impaired, and so on, speech and language issues that they may have. So those categories of disabilities, we know that all of those children are vulnerable. However, there's an even larger group of children within our school system. They're there. Some of these children are not attending regularly, maybe because of the poverty level. Their parents are not able to send them out every day, and they're not getting the requisite services to ensure that they're in school every day. There are those children who may be so emotionally disturbed, yes, that is on the disabilities. And there are those who are gifted and talented who will need a special program because we don't want to bore them to death and allow behavioral disorders to creep in when the curriculum is so inflexible that here you are in grade 1 learning 1 + 1 = 2 when they are way ahead of the game. What do we do to take care of their individual needs, right? There are children who have nutritional issues, and because of those nutritional issues, they are not doing as well as they should. There are those who have language issues. So the beautiful French Creole may actually be influencing the way in which they acquire school language, which is standard solution English. So that may be what is impacting learning because they are not going between two languages. Yes. So there are issues that can create that kind of problem. Where, they are underachieving and so they need special attention, in addition to those with disabilities. Now, what are the 6 policy components that will enable the achievement of these overall policy goals? And again, as Dion mentioned, we were able to glean these from all the desk review that we did, from the interviews with persons, stakeholders, teachers, and so on. Dion had mentioned them. And one of the things is, what are the organizational structures that are absolutely necessary to allow access to quality inclusive education to be workable, to be successful? So we're going to look at the different levels, at the school level, the district level, the ministry level, and so on. What are these structures that should be in place to enable access? And then we need to look at what are the infrastructural provisions and support mechanisms that are necessary to make access a reality. So do we need ramps? Do we need other kinds of structural adjustment to enable a student with wheelchair or walker? Many of these students may not have intellectual challenges. It's a physical challenge. So what happens when you look at the University of the West Indies, Mona, St. Augustine, Cave Hill, you will see many of these students who are there, and they are doing as well and even better than many of our other students, because there's nothing wrong intellectually. They do have physical challenges. So we have to remove those barriers to enable them to maximize their true potential. Then we need to look at human resource provisions. We need to look at quantity. How many of special educators do we need? How many speech and language pathologists, the clinical psychologists, and so on. And not only how many, but the quality. What are the minimum training requirements that they must have to be able to function in our schools and to deliver services? Then we need to look at the curriculum. Is it still designed for every single learner? Meaning, or is it designed for every single learner, or is it designed for those children who are straight up average down the line? What about those children who are in grade 3, for argument's sake, and are way ahead of the grade 3 curriculum? What about those grade 3 students who are not yet reading on grade level, who have difficulty keeping up with the grade 3 curriculum? What do we do? Are we differentiating? Are we meeting their needs? Or are we curriculum-centered, teacher-centered, and so on, that we forget the needs of the children? So what adaptations and modifications need to be made to the curriculum is what we are also looking at. Stakeholder involvement, extremely important, that parents understand their rights and privileges just like their children. And the various stakeholders within the society, private sector, public sector, the international agencies, and so on. Who are our stakeholders and how do they get involved so that we may enhance the programs at the various levels? And very, very, very important is the fact that we need to look at our identification systems. What are we doing in terms of identifying our children with special education needs and disabilities? Once we have identified them, what are we doing when it comes to intervention? What are the programs needed to maximize their potential? And all wrapped up in that, where do we place them? Do they get placed in a general education classroom with services brought to them? Do they go to a special school? Do they go to a special class within a general education setting? So all of these must be taken into consideration for us to have access to quality, inclusive education. And I'm going to go in further details with each of these. I'll do 3 and Kathy will present the other 3. Go ahead, Dion. Okay, so the very first one we're looking at is identification, intervention, and placement. And the policy goal: all learners with SEND, special education needs and disabilities, will have access to quality, appropriate, inclusive education with free and compulsory primary and secondary education in their communities with their peers, unless it is clearly demonstrated that the child's educational welfare and social needs may not be adequately met in a general education classroom. It's important to note that St. Lucia already has free and compulsory primary and secondary education, but is this extended to our children who have SEND? It has to happen. Yes, but then maybe they're being asked to fund aspects of their program, their intervention program, or their assessment. So we're saying they are entitled to free and compulsory primary and secondary education. And as much as is possible, they must be placed within their communities with their peers, unless what is happening to them and may impact others or may not be well met in a general education classroom. So what are the things that are necessary now when we talk about identification, intervention, and placement? 1, early identification systems. We must be able to identify as early as possible what their needs are. Some children from birth, Ministry of Health knows that this child has some problems. Child may be born with some physical handicapping conditions, right? Or physical disabilities, because we're only handicapped when we don't have corrective measures or barriers are not removed. If I remove these glasses right now, I will be handicapped because I would not be able to read what is happening here. But so I am visually impaired, but with the glasses, I'm fine. And it's no longer a handicapping condition because I can read with the glasses. Similarly, if I have a wheelchair and that's what's going to make me mobile, then I'm not handicapped. I simply have a physical disability or an impairment, but it's fixed because I'm able to move around in my wheelchair. So the early identification system may pick up at birth some of the issues. Some children, it's not going to manifest until age 6 or so. And then there are those, for example, who go on to high school, did extremely well, and suddenly this child is acting up. And the work is suffering, the child is aggressive or may have withdrawn into self. When we get behind it, there may be physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse. Something has changed in that child's life. And as a response, the child is now showing some other symptoms and it's affecting educational achievement. In that situation, that was the earliest possible time when the child hit high school that we noticed this. So anywhere along the line, hopefully as young as possible, then we are able to start the intervention early, and that will make the prognosis much better. We also, here you go, Mommy, culturally relevant and standardized assessment instruments that speak to the needs and the nuances, the things about us as Caribbean people, as St. Lucians. Are any of the items biased against the children? Are we interpreting incorrectly their responses? Or is it the item is so badly informed, that the children don't fully understand what is required of them. Yes. So we need to examine the instruments that we use, not just take them from wherever they come and then they are problematic and giving us diagnosis that we cannot stand by and that we don't even trust sometimes. Yes. So we have to look at that. Placement in the least restrictive, most enabling environment. Now, there's a range of possible placements that a child may have once a special education need and disability is identified. So the one that is supposed to be the most suitable, the most enabling, and least restrictive should be a general education classroom where the services are brought to them. Therefore, they're able to interact with their peers and have that kind of social emotional development at that level and so on. However, if the child's needs demand that the child should be in a special school, because at this point in time, this is the best placement for this child, given all the presenting problems. And maybe the child can go into general ed, but in a special class where there is some interaction, depending on what is happening, PE and so on. But there is that that kind of environment within the general education classroom or within a general education school. So we want a range of placement options. As you know, there are children who are incarcerated. They're in particular kinds of facilities because they have messed with the law, and so they have to face the consequences. Is it that their education continues in that setting that they're in? Teenagers, or even if you're not a teen and you're pregnant, what happens during that period? Does your education continue? So we want to know, whatever environment that you are in, that it is not restricting you from maximizing your full potential. Then we want to look at the intervention program development. What kinds of intervention programs, individualized education plans, and so on? What do we have? Are they meeting the needs of the children once we have identified that there are needs, right? Then we want to look at the transition across phases and levels of education. So if I'm in kindergarten, it's a big deal when I transition into grade 1. Different levels of expectations. In kindergarten, I may be allowed to sleep and do certain things. Suddenly in grade 1, I must sit up nicely in the chair and I must go through this the whole day and just lunch and break time. And, it's very different. I'm not a baby anymore. And then when I hit grade 4, now you're saying, oh, you're in the upper school, so you're to behave differently. You're in grade 4, 5, and 6, and then you're going to transition. A big deal is now to transition to high school, where you've gone from one nice lady or gentleman taking care of you all day to all these people who just come in and out of your life for the rest for a given day, and expectations are different. So how do we handle that transition period? Some children fall apart during the transition, and therefore we have to put systems in place to deal with that. Referral systems, extremely important. How do we go about at the school level identifying and making referrals? How do parents go about making referrals? Anyone who wants to make a referral because they've noticed something outside of the so-called norm that's happening to this child. What are the stages? What does it look like? And how effective? What are the things to be in place to make it highly effective? That's what we're looking at. Go ahead. So at this point, we're asking you, based on identification, intervention, and placement, if there are any questions, anything you would love to have clarified, or just have a comment on what you just heard and so. Okay, if all is clear, please make notes as we go along. And
moment, Joe, I think Cleo wants to say something again. Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Cleo.
Hi, sorry, don't mean to dominate the conversation, but I was just thinking while you were speaking with respect to the not so smooth transition process sometimes. By the way, I'm from South Louis South. But I speak a lot about, my experience with my kids as a parent. Okay. Yeah. So with respect to the transition, period. Okay, moving from the preschool to kindergarten. I heard a lot of teachers. I mean, my kids had wonderful teachers, I must say, but I did hear, those comments very often about kids that could not really make the transition so smoothly. About oh, this child is just spoiled. They think they are babies. They want to, they think they're still they think they're still at the preschool. I mean, we are my kids. Well, the girls. My son didn't have that problem, but the two girls, they refused to use the washroom at the infant school. Okay, they refused to use the washroom because they come from an area where they had, the nice washrooms, clean washrooms, and so on. At the preschool, all of a sudden you have, 30, 40, whatever number of persons using that one washroom assigned to them. So, boy, I remember after picking them up when they got home, just give them room. Okay, otherwise they're going to have an accident at the front door. They would just not use the washroom at the primary school, So another complaint was there isn't even a mat in the grade K class. There isn't even a mat. They come from the preschool where they are used to having, sitting on their little mat and, they do their reading and so on. They go to the primary school and they are expected to sit on those hard chairs. And even me as an adult, these things hurt my bottom. So you can imagine what that does to, what that does to a 5-year-old. So all of these things, sometimes we don't take them into consideration. And when the kids act up, sometimes we say, oh, they are just spoiled. And you all are no longer at preschool. Even when the kids go to the secondary school, again, some of our policies, and in some cases, it's not even the policies, but some of our habits as educators, I would say, we don't, our attitudes sometimes don't help with the transition. Okay. I remember teachers saying to me, even, I won't even tell you my age, but when I remember trying to adjust at the secondary school level, and they will tell you, okay, you are a young adult now, okay? So, it's almost as if you were expected to magically make the transition without any assistance, And even for us at the college, we have to accept some responsibility for these things as well, because when the kids are coming from the secondary school where everything is structured, everything, they have their 9 to their 8 to, 8 to 3 or whatever schedule that they have. But when they come to the college, we are sometimes not even conscious of the fact that they are not, the flexibility that they have at college, they are not used to that at the secondary school. So so I'm glad that we are putting things in place, to as part of our policies to ensure that we help with that transition. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that contribution. Transition is indeed important as you move from one stage to the next, and the support is needed. And sometimes that's why we lose the kids, because they are not able to make that transition smoothly. Okay, go ahead, Damon. Okay, organizational structures. Overall policy goal. Policy and strategies describe how support structures at all levels will be organized to enable schools to effectively implement inclusive education. Now, whether or not we know and we accept, our schools have children with special education needs and disabilities included in the general education classroom. That's where most of them are, because our special schools have a limited amount of children. However, the concept of inclusion goes beyond just having them there. It must mean that you provide the services to ensure that they can maximize their potential. So what are the organizational structures necessary when it comes to financing, monitoring, and evaluation? Extremely important that the budget speaks to line items within education related to special education, related to equipment, material, and so on that are necessary to enhance access, to make sure access is going to be activated in a way that it can be successfully implemented. Then we're going to look at, and in doing that, when you put money into things, or when you put energy and time, you must monitor and evaluate to ensure that what you intend to do is actually happening. Yes? So stakeholders must be a part of that monitoring. Then there's general education or inclusive schools. What are the structures to make our general education schools truly inclusive schools? Yes, so we need to look at the principal, the training, the staffing, and so on, material, equipment, assistive technology, and so on. Then, material. I'm getting an echo now. Okay, for post-secondary education, we're also looking beyond secondary schools. What are the structures necessary to ensure access? Special schools are definitely a part of what we're also looking at, because at the special school level, what is being offered there must be able to allow the children placed there to truly maximize their potential and become productive citizens of St. Lucia. So they too will have to be potential and become productive. Dion, can you mute the person whose mic is open? Okay, so for inclusive special education units, those that are placed in schools, to ensure that there's that kind of integration, what kind of structure must be in place to make that workable, so that the children are not segregated and isolated in a way that they feel badly about self, and that social emotional side of them is not developing as it should? How do we structure the intersectoral, interministerial plan where we have Ministry of Health, Education, Social Welfare, gender issues, any agency or any ministry that has a part of what we consider to be our children in education, and therefore we need to know what you're doing and how we can collaborate in the best interest of this child, because Ministry of Health has data that we need, but they may be holding on to it because it's private, it's confidential, and so on. But we also need to know that. So is there some place where we can have all this data, where we can have access to, which still maintains confidentiality and so on? And if there are some of our children who are long-term in hospital, we need to know how to get services to that child to enable that child's continued education, and so on. Social welfare may actually be funding you to get to school through whatever programs they may have. What we need to know, because education budget is not big enough to stretch to do everything. So once we have this kind of collaboration, then we know what each other is doing, and we know how to spend what we have in the best interest of that child. So the organizational structures will be at different levels: the school level, the district level, the department level, and so on, home and community level. What is necessary for all of this to work? Okay, you can go on, Dion. Any questions on organizational structures before I go to the third one, which I believe, go to the next one.
Just checking quickly whether there are any questions or comments in the
I'm
chat.
not seeing any in the chat.
Okay.
Anyone wants to contribute? If not, then we can go on, and you can do it at the end if you prefer to do it that way. All right, go ahead, Dion.
Hi, good evening. I have a question.
Okay,
Jana James, principal of the OJ Combined School.
Yes.
And you're speaking about the organizational structure. I understand the thrust is to ensure that there is inclusiveness in our nation's schools.
Yeah.
Can you outline to me what is the proper path that should be followed if a child of special needs is discovered within a community? What is the proper path? What is the right way in which a school should be informed of such? And what support, if any, should a school expect from, for lack of a better expression, those above the principal's pay grade?
Okay, so this is what this policy is all about. Looking at the gaps, we recognize that we heard from their schools, we heard from their principals, we heard from the teachers what those challenges are when they actually meet a child who has. So let's walk through quickly. So we recognize that this child, let's say the child is in grade 2, and reading well below age and grade expectancy level. So the teacher is the one who made a referral in grade 2 that this child, having gone through K, having gone through grade 1, now in grade 2, this child is still having challenges learning, still not able to recognize numbers and letters and the sounds the letters make and so on. A parent needs to be informed that we have a challenge, and once a parent comes in, we are advocating that there must be a school-based team to start with. So that school-based team would have teacher reps, would have, if there's a special educator available at the school or at the district office, then that special educator should be a part of that team where the evidence is brought forward and examined. That's the first level of referral. Once the evidence is examined and the school says, yes, we're going to develop a program, we're going to try first. We don't think that this case needs to be referred to the district or to the department for the multidisciplinary team to come in as yet. We're going to try some things because we recognize the child is lagging behind. So we're advocating that in cases where the school decides we're going to try, then an intervention is done and there's a review. Once that there's a review, you determine whether it's termly, monthly, or whatever that review that's going to take place, then decisions would have to be made about, wow, I think we really need to bring in the team now because having done X, Y, and Z, it's not working to the best way that we would like it to work. So here you might have the referral made through the district for the team, a full team, to assess this child. Let's say the child is diagnosed with a specific learning disability and the child is dyslexic, difficulty learning to read. And when you look at all of that now, you're saying this child does not need to be segregated into a special school. The best placement for this child is a general education inclusive school with services brought to the child. This is where now we're advocating on behalf of your schools that the structure be in place now to provide the schools with what they need, the materials, the equipment, the support services through whether it be a pathway coach, special educator, and so on, and also in-service training for your teachers to be able to differentiate instruction to meet different needs groups of learners. Because as it is right now in your school, there's no such homogeneous grouping where everybody's at the same level, the grade. So even when you stream and find that, let's say we have 3 classes in a grade, and so you have stream A, B, C, none of these streams would be perfectly homogeneous. So there are going to be differences in those groups. So you will still have to differentiate instruction. And the best way actually is to do mixed ability groupings and to provide levels of teaching and so on. The curriculum, as we mentioned earlier, has to have adaptations and modifications for the teacher to be able to apply that level of differentiation to say, okay, in my grade 2 class, I have beginning readers. I also have children who are reading at grade 1 level, and I have some children at grade 3 level. So how do I prepare? I'm teaching them, and I'm going to ensure that I do differentiation to bring everybody up. So there, along the path, there are different, so you have your referral, and we're making recommendations as to what kinds of treatment, what model is necessary for intervention to be successful, and what placement. Yes. So there may also be a child who is visually impaired or blind who can cope in a general education classroom once we remove the barriers, the obstacles that may create problems for that child. And if the child has the technology to use, not just the Braille alone, but there are computers now that the child can listen to all that the teacher is saying and doing, and the visual things are being converted to auditory things, and so on. So, and it depends on the readiness of a particular school and what are the things necessary to accommodate children who are visually impaired, children who are hearing impaired, and the whole spectrum of other children with disabilities. So good question. And this is what the total package is about. What are the things that are necessary to enable a gen ed school to become inclusive?
Okay, so if I may further expound on my question. You have explained what happens in the general education setting with students within our scope, our normal realm. But what happens when a child from the outside is identified? What should the process be? How does
that child is not in your school any at all, but has been
the child is not, or we're speaking. The child was not a member of the school population. The child was identified externally. What would and should
explain externally? Could you please explain externally? Was this child at home, not going to school at all?
At home and not at school at all. Okay. And yes. And
so maybe someone identified. Go ahead.
I just wanted to find out what
right.
the correct
is. That child coming straight from home, and we have many such cases all over the region, because some parents choose not to have their child in the regular system or not even in a special school. Some children are hidden because their parents are still in denial, and so on. And sometimes it's community members who go to a proper agency to say, we know of a child who is home. So the same applies. That child needs to be seen directly, because there are several things happening here. The school attendance officer, somebody has to know that this child is not attending school at all. So there are several procedures. But let's say the department, the special education unit would have to be drawn in right away on that child, because you have no data in school on that child. You have no evidence of what the child can and cannot do. So what you have to do immediately before a child is registered in a school, that and the child can be registered, because if that's the nearest school and all of that, but immediately that multidisciplinary team must be called upon to assess the child, to give you the data you need if that school, if the gen ed school is appropriate placement for that child, start his or her intervention. If, however, it's not the appropriate placement, the placement might very well be in a special school to get the child started, bring the child up to a particular level, and then reintegrate, because that child may not have intellectual challenges, may not have physical disabilities, may just be a child with emotional disturbances. And even if the child had any of the 14 or so disabilities, still deserves an appropriate education and access to educational facilities. But then, as you said, if the child is just being pulled out of home, no information known on this child, then the department must act to ensure that the child is tested, a diagnosis made, parents brought in, parents trained too, because for too long this child has gone without services before the child can be integrated in a general education classroom coming from, and it also depends on the child's age. Yeah.
Okay, so perfect with this. I've understood. But when we look at the assessment by the MDT team, would it be right that the child is registered onto a school's special education portal without having a conversation prior to the school at hand? Is that normal practice, or would there or should there have been communication prior so that everyone would have been on the same page, and then to allow the school to at least ensure that it was or it is retrofitted to accommodate the child?
You are correct. Sometimes what happens though, there's a rush to place because the child's rights are being violated. And so sometimes what we do in the system is but even when we quickly try to place a child and then back up to do the assessments and all of that, a school must be informed. A discussion must be had with the school that, look, we have this child, there are some issues. We are going to be assessing the child is on the waiting list, or we're bringing the child forward and so on. We need to check to see how ready your school is, depending on the needs of the child, how the child presents, and all of these things must be taken into consideration. And a consultation with the school is very important so that you are ready. Or you may say, wow, I'm not sure we are in a position at this point to include a child with these kinds of issues. Let's talk about it. What else we would need in our school to be able to do that? So yes, a conversation must be had, should be had.
Thank you very much. I love the use of the word consultation and the fact that the school should have been or should be given a choice to determine their state of readiness. And like I have always said, every single child deserves a right to education, but I would just like, as we go forward with the special education bill, that we are not too quick to make decisions and to put the school out on a stressful end, that we ensure that the necessary support is provided for the school, and that we look at all children as being equal. And our aim as educators should be to allow every single child, irrespective of their disability, an opportunity to achieve some level of success. So thank you very much. You have explained my question eloquently. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to say though, and I really appreciate that question and all of that. There are, however, some schools that even with the conversation, even with the collaboration, they are resistant to change. They want the perfect human being. And there is no such thing. Father God didn't make us like that. So there are those principals, those teachers within the system who will fight hard to ensure that they keep certain children out, because certain children also affect the overall results. So the whole matter of assessment and how a school is viewed, we have to change how we think about it, because we have to look at value added, not just simply the results of a test. And therefore, there are different sides to this coin that we need to have that open conversation to ensure that we are doing the best by way of our children. Thank you.
You are definitely correct, Miss. The scenario I just brought to you was my school's context. Mm-hmm. So it was something that I experienced just recently, from September up until now. So I just wanted to, because the conversation has not been had since. I do not know why everyone has shied away from the conversation since, but the student is at school, the student is doing well. But it was a situation where a conversation was had. I would not necessarily call it a consultation. It was a situation where the student was registered onto the school's special needs portal without any communication with the head of the school, which would have made myself. And the child was only registered towards the end of the first term. So I am saying all of this to say that sometimes we need to be mindful of how we act and let us do things properly. I operate with a conscience. It is not all about, my school is not just about academics. It's about having students achieve their best. In my case, all I waited for would have been support. And that support never came. So it was one where I had to find the support for the student myself through the help of corporate society. And I'm using this example to ensure that as we move forward, that no other principal has to experience what I have gone through, because it was an extremely stressful and emotional period, because we want to ensure that we treat children properly, we treat children with dignity. We want to ensure that as long as a child is enrolled at our institution, we know that we are 100% and solely responsible for their care and their safety. So we want to ensure that all of the amenities, as much as humanly possible, would allow for a smooth transition for a student. So that is why I brought the question up.
Thank you so much. And I'm happy to hear the student is doing well.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right.
Oh, hi, Joan. I did share with you and Dion. Oh, sorry. Good evening, everyone. A comment/question that I think is of value to this discussion pertains to gifted and talented students.
Okay, let me see. Okay, so it's saying here, a concern is equal with those who are gifted and talented and those who must start school early. Okay, now the gifted and talented child is a part of this plan as a child with special education needs. Internationally, they are recognized as having special education needs. So because they have these needs, if we don't identify them as such and provide curricular adaptations and modifications, enrichment programs, and so on at every level, kindergarten level. It's not only about acceleration. Some gifted and talented children, depending on their level of maturity, can be accelerated. But for the most part, I can tell you, our emotional self or emotional IQ is not usually as advanced as our intellectual side. And therefore, many times, gifted and talented children will suffer if they are put with older children and expect to behave in a particular way. They are still little kids. I was watching a movie just today, and today is a national holiday in Jamaica. So I was watching a movie while I should be at work. Right? It's Ash Wednesday. It's a national holiday. And there was this little gifted girl who was being, and it's a true story, who is in college at 9. But her parents have to take her to play with her peers, her little games that little girls will be playing at that age, separate and apart from being in college. She's a mathematician of no mean order. Yes. So we have to accommodate these children. In Jamaica, for example, some of our known, and I'm not saying that children with gifts and talents end up being criminals, but some of them have gone that way because we have never understood them. They are made Some of them organize high levels of criminal activities right here at home. We've heard about them. We've heard how their primary school could not maintain them. There was one, his situation was such, he read off all the books in the junior library, and at a tender age, they had to make him register in the senior library. And right through high school, nobody could contain him. And he turned to organizing criminal activities. So what and a lot of them become aggressive or depressed because we are not catering to their needs. And just as how we would want to cater to a child who's visually impaired and provide all the things necessary for that child to be successful and to adapt in the regular school system, is the same way for the gifted and talented child. We must recognize those talents. We must recognize those gifts and do, even within the classroom, the enrichment programs that are necessary. And if the acceleration is appropriate for that, because assessment is an individualized thing. So we can't generalize from one gifted child to the other that this child deserves or should be accelerated, skip a grade. Yes, as usually was done in the past. No, it depends on the level of maturity of that child that you would make certain decisions. But if the child is not being accelerated by grade, you can be accelerated within your classroom setting through differentiated instruction. So yes, our gifted and talented children are an integral part of what we are promoting here. Okay. Dion, can you go to the
Okay, I'm not seeing another hand. I'm going to go forward.
Okay, so my last discussion with you is about curricular adaptations and modifications. So the Chief Education Officer will institute programs promoting equity and quality inclusive education that will ensure that the varying needs of learners will be facilitated through curricular accommodations, modifications, and adaptations, and adaptive and assistive technology, which will allow all children to optimize their potential. All of that is saying, hey, examine your curriculum. Is it a one-size-fits-all curriculum? Because that is not going to be appropriate in this side of the 21st century. No, we have recognized that all these years and some of the challenges we have had and the failures we have had to do with this one-size-fits-all curriculum. And St. Lucia has led the way in the region by virtue of examining their curriculum and saying, look, we're going to have tiered levels. So we recognize that even though you may be in this grade, you are not yet ready for this grade, or you have exceeded the grade expectation. So we're making some modification so that the teacher who is working with you will understand that if this particular outcome is not good enough or appropriate enough for all the children in my class, here are some alternatives that you may use for those children who are falling behind, so you can bring them up while you work with your middle group, while you have your accelerated group doing what is appropriate for their level. So everybody is being attentive to everybody's needs. Some learners like myself, I'm not a good auditor learner. I'm a strong visual learner, and also I'm a strong kinesthetic tactile learner. When I do things, I learn more. When I'm engaged, I learn more. When I see the things, I learn more. So my preference is that, are we teaching in that way to ensure that the different learning styles or learning preferences are being catered to, the different levels of achievement and so on? So what are the adaptations we're looking at now? And it's at kindergarten to Form 5, where we're saying, look, examine your national curricula. Is it tiered, T-I-E-R-E-D? Is it tiered so that every child in that classroom can access their objectives for different groups of learners? Yes. So my overall objective may be to teach everybody to draw conclusions based on what is read or seen or heard or whatever, And so everybody's going to learn to draw conclusions or to make inferences. But when it comes to the activity now, I may have to give one group an easier, maybe some pictures to draw conclusions, make inferences, or a simple passage at their level. Another group might get a more difficult passage to read, and so on. So how do we cater to their needs from kindergarten to Form 5? Then pre-service teacher training programs. At the teacher training college, we must include as compulsory courses that deal with an awareness and strategies for dealing with children with varying needs, so that the young teacher does not graduate and suddenly goes into a school and finds, oh my gosh, I can't cater to the needs of all these learners. Some of these learners have never met this in college. That has to stop. The course must be one that is compulsory, because that's what exists in our classes, mixed ability groups of children. All right. In-service teacher training programs have to be ongoing, have to be regular. Now, we know that they're happening, but the teachers are saying we need more. We need more intensive training, because we are not aware of some of these things that we're asked to do. So more has to happen there. Universal design for learning, which promotes response to intervention, differentiated instruction. All these are necessary for us to meet the needs of every single child in the classroom. Assessment accommodation, Mom spoke about that earlier, where what are the apart from having challenges with the validity and reliability of some of these instruments, when it comes to administering a test, CXC allows you to have a reader once you are properly diagnosed. Yes, they allow you to have a writer. They allow you extra time if that's what's going to help you to maximize your performance on this test. All of these things are allowed, and they're also allowed in your national tests. However, at the school level, it doesn't happen. So if we know that children can do better if we give them more time, 10 more minutes, 15 more minutes, because we already know what their challenge is. Some children can't write quickly. They have fine motor coordination problem. So if we say 1 hour test and everybody's writing, I am being disadvantaged because I can't write as fast as the others. Yes, the world has changed. There are some all the way up to a PhD or a medical doctor and so on. There are universities in England, in the United States, in all parts of Europe where you can be orally tested. And you will have a doctor who you know is not the best of readers, is dyslexic. Yes. But that is he's a fantastic doctor, and he can write that prescription and he can diagnose what is happening with you. So we have to, at every level, start to think of how else can we assess our children? What accommodations can we make when it comes to assessment? Okay, that's the end of my time with you. Any questions, concerns, issues before Kathy takes the stage? Okay, I'm going
to ask Kathy to go ahead with, given the time frame now.
We have that constraints, yes.
Oh, yes. Okay, so good evening again, everyone. In terms of the another focus area of this policy, it will look specifically at infrastructural provisions and support mechanisms. So the overall policy goal related to this area of focus is that the government of St. Lucia, through the Department of Education, will provide those structures and systems that will provide reasonable accommodation and in the form of adaptations, resources, and support that will optimize those opportunities and outcomes for learners with SEND, and having to do so within what is truly an inclusive environment. Now, in order for that policy goal to really, come to fruition, a number of areas will be given focus. So, for instance, one of those areas is that of accessible classrooms and buildings. So the intent of the policy, for instance, when it comes to this area, is to consider, for instance, which aspects of buildings will be adjusted or improved. Now, once that is done, there would need to be other considerations. So, for instance, accessibility of classrooms and buildings will take into consideration the provision of ramps, the provision of handrails, the need to widen doorways. Again, the focus is accessibility. Additionally, consideration would be given to accessible toilet facilities. We heard the reference to preserving the dignity of our SEND learners, placing them in environments that will allow them to flourish. So certainly, access to toilet facilities cannot be ignored. Yes, and we would look at those estimates that would need to be made to ensure that this accessibility is provided. Okay. Certainly, other considerations would include visual and auditory supports. So, for instance, we're looking at those adaptations, such as braille signage, maybe changing the internal lighting in schools to ensure that visual learners who do have issues or need support when it comes to visual and auditory accommodation would be catered for. When we look at multiple means of communication, yes, we're looking at whether or not there's learners are able to communicate through the best means that works for them. So are they taught to use sign language? Do they have access to alternative script? Okay. We also would have to consider those adaptive technologies. So are there materials that would allow for example, for text to speech translations? Are there materials that would allow our learners to engage in note taking that would allow for them to write? Okay. When we look at accessible learning materials, also we're looking at adjusting and providing those materials that would allow all of our learners to experience the success, all of those materials that would allow them to meet to attain the goals of instruction, all of those materials that would allow them to succeed. Certainly, the issue of how playgrounds are organized, we would need to look at whether the structure or the layout of a playground truly takes into account that there would be more than one learner who has to access, who needs to have fun, who based on his or her age group would need to participate in fun activities, who doesn't need to only focus on the academics, but the social side of development. So all of these would have to be taken into consideration if we are truly looking at systems and structures that will provide reasonable accommodation for our learners, our SEND learners, within this truly inclusive environment. Okay. Are there any comments or questions on the provision of infrastructural support mechanisms?
Just one question, please, Doc. When we look specifically at students who are autistic, because every year we see an increase in the number of autistic children that we register. What specific provisions would be made for them? I mean, their range on the spectrum, it varies. We have some who can do very well, and then we have some who would need an aid. So right now, we are operating in an absence of of information. Would there be something that would be multisensory for them. I know that sometimes they suffer from sensory, overload. Would those who require an aid, would provisions be made for that? Because you can just imagine a classroom of 25 students, and then we have this autistic child, how, it throws off the entire ambience. And these children are brilliant, gifted children, but currently we are unable to reach them. Or, like I stated again, is the dignity of the process for that child. So what is in place for our autistic children who are currently enrolled within the system?
Certainly the policy would aim to provide all of the necessary materials. If we go back, you would have noticed that we spoke of accessible learning materials. So certainly the creation of those sensory environments that would allow the autistic students to flourish would need to be provided. And certainly the policy is looking for or making recommendations that we hope would be put into practice or taken very, very seriously. And that provision of access to materials would certainly go hand in hand with the provision of human resources who are actually trained to deal with and to, kind of carry those learners who need access to such materials, to kind of carry those students to offer them the necessary support. So it's not just the material, but the training of the human resources or the persons who deal directly, the instructors, with those students in order to give them the necessary support.
I think I want to jump in on that here as well, Kathy, that recall that autism is one of the 14 categories that we spoke of, up front in the beginning of the presentation. But also that I wanted to ask this question of the person who asked the question, whether or not, you said increasingly you're seeing higher numbers of children coming into school labeled as autistic. Are these children coming with reports? Which would indicate that an assessment has been done. And here is the report of that assessment, so that the school system can now create an IEP for this child. So I'm just trying to figure out the process by which we are saying these children are autistic.
Okay, so in my instance, I had a student who came in with a report from CDGC. We were not aware that we had to start the entire MDT process for that child. However, the parents are cooperating and they have started that process. So he is currently in grade 1. And what we have done, since attention span is so short, we have differentiated his exam. So his exam would be the only one for his grade that would be colored, but it would be shorter to allow him as much as possible to sit through and to be tested. However, we are waiting I guess we're waiting for the process to be completed and to get the report from the special ed unit so we can move forward. I have a student who is currently in grade 5. His process was finished maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, and I am still waiting on the report. So at least an IEP can be developed for him. So it obtains that there is a backlog in terms of the release of the MDT reports that would give us the relevant information so that we can work with these children in a timely manner. In the interim, we are left to do our own research and to try to see how best we can work with the child or children to allow them to experience varying levels of success. Because, I mean, you know that sometimes the child will have a meltdown, etc. So we are now learning how to deal with the meltdowns. We are now learning how to, assist the child. Thankfully, parents are super supportive, so we're getting the assistance from them. But I know that in my district, District 6, I'm not the only school that is affected. I'm hoping that my colleague is still on and she can speak specifically to her school. But this is what obtains at the school that I am at. So we are still waiting. We did not know. There are certain things that we took for granted, that if the child came in with the report from CDGC and that was sent to the special education unit, that something would have started, some process would have started so that the report could have been done and that child would be operating from an IEP. We now know differently, so we are doing differently.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And so, yes, the policy would be written around ensuring that whatever category the child falls in, there are the infrastructure provision and the support services are available to attend to those needs. Thank you very much for your contribution. It has raised some insights for us, and we are grateful for your participation. Is there anyone else who has a comment on the last slide? If not, we can move on. I think we're on a tight schedule. I think Cleo is here.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. Just a quick comment. With respect to accessible classrooms and buildings, I'm happy to see that there. We take it for granted sometimes that a new school is being built, and automatically we assume that facilities would be made for persons with physical students with physical challenges. I remember all too well when we had at the South Louis Community College in the South. Right now under the EQUIP project, we are getting some new classrooms, and then with this, there is going to be a ramp and other facilities for persons with physical disabilities. But the existing building that was in 1997, 98. We never really thought about it. We had no ramps or anything, believe it or not. So we didn't get too many students with physical disabilities until that one time we had this student who came in, a brilliant young lady, and her mom had to be at the school for the entire day. So she was a full-time student. So when she had classes upstairs, her mom had to accompany her upstairs. She needed support. She wasn't in a wheelchair, but she had a physical disability. So at some point when my staff, we have a small staff, a very caring staff. So when we realized that her mom had to leave everything behind and be with her at school every day so she could accompany her to the washroom. The female washroom is downstairs, by the way. We have one female washroom. It was downstairs. So imagine the child has a class upstairs. Well, the student had a class upstairs and she needed to use the washroom. Her mom had to take her down. So eventually we kind of split the responsibility. Some of her peers would assist her. And my staff and myself, we would help her up and down the stairs and, to move from classroom to classroom. And so we take it for granted sometimes that when buildings are being constructed, school buildings, that this is something that would have been factored in, but that has not been the case. So I'm glad to see that, I'm glad to see that, it is factored into into our policy. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I think there's another hand here, Melka Daniel. Melka, is your hand still up, or can we move on? Okay, I think we can move on, Kathy, just in case she comes back.
Okay, or perhaps Melka, you can put the question in the chat, and it would be responded to. Okay, so we move on to another really critical consideration of the policy, which would be human resource provisions. And when we focus on human resource provisions, takes a look at the provision of appropriate measures that will improve the quantity and the quality of teachers, the quantity and the quality of teacher educators, the quantity and the quality of educational leaders and other specialists who support school communities in implementing inclusive education. Now, again, the focus is on the improvement of quantity and quality. So certainly, there will be a focus on ensuring that there is an appropriate multidisciplinary assessment team, and one that would take into account the varying needs of sender learners. So there are recommendations for the composition of that team. So for instance, and you will notice here that we're focusing on the capacity building of all of those individuals who would be responsible for the implementation of inclusive education. So when we look at the composition of that multidisciplinary assessment team, we're looking at whether or not that team has persons like, a special educator, a general education teacher, a clinical or a school psychologist, behavior specialist, of course, parents, a guardian representative, school counselors, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and so on. So we're looking at the provision of a range of specialists who would be able to deal with the various needs with which the learners, or the needs of the learners. Along with that, another consideration would be the provision of qualified teaching staff, and making sure that that would include individuals who themselves may have disabilities, and including those persons both in inclusive and special schools. Another recommendation or consideration would be looking at what the minimum qualification should be for a special education teacher, and perhaps looking at it as being a bachelor's degree in education, or in special education rather, being that minimum qualification for a special education teacher. When it comes to teachers who are already in the system, and we would have noted through the consultations prior to developing the policy that many teachers lamented the fact that they did not feel that they were adequately trained for the to deal with the demands and the needs of dealing with and providing instruction and the support to send learners. So for sure, if you're looking at increasing capacity and looking at increasing quantity and quality, or quality for sure, there would need to be ongoing professional development. So whether it is for in-service teachers or even pre-service teachers, so that they could access maybe courses that would be considered compulsory courses from the Division of Teacher Education, or other retooling or reschooling, retooling or reskilling programs that would allow them to develop or equip them with the necessary skills so that they can deliver what is expected of them, and that they can function within such an environment. Additionally, another consideration would be that the sender unit would be staffed with qualified education officers. We would also look at teacher educators. Now, if the requirement would be for teachers to go through or send teachers to be going through or to be exposed to ongoing professional development, then certainly the individuals who are required to train them to function effectively within the SEND environment certainly would themselves have to be trained. So there will be a focus on ensuring that teacher educators themselves are qualified to prepare in-service teachers to function within inclusive classrooms. And of course, if you are again, the focus is on implementing inclusive education, then certainly school leaders who are leading the charge in terms of managing and planning for instruction for their specific schools, they would have to receive some training also on how they can integrate. So for instance, when they look at their strategic goals at the unit level, meaning their specific institutions, how will the goals of successful implementation of inclusive education, how will that be factored into their own strategic planning? So certainly school leaders and persons who manage inclusive schools and special schools would need to be exposed to training which will equip them with the necessary skills. Again, we remember that the focus is the provision of quality personnel who basically would have to deliver and implement. Okay. Do you have any comments or questions? I think I saw.
Kathy, I'm going to ask you to go on to the very last one, and then we'll wrap up with all the questions that are online and given the time frame.
Okay, not a problem. Okay, so we're looking at certainly another key consideration is stakeholder involvement. And the policy goal when it comes to stakeholder involvement is that the Department of Education will establish a framework that will identify stakeholders and the roles that they will play, and that the policy will also outline the strategies that will be used to engage and to support engage the stakeholders and allow them to support the implementation of special and inclusive education. So in terms of the stakeholders who will be focused upon, we of course cannot exclude parents or guardians. So for instance, when you look at the role that parents or guardians, things like what is their role in the various processes that their wards or children would have to go through. For instance, what is the role of the parent in terms of the referral process, the assessment of the learner, intervention and learning, or the evaluation of the learner? Okay, what is the role or responsibility of the parent when it comes to placement? Essentially, any other decisions that would impact their child or ward, what exactly is the role of the parent or guardian in that regard? Of course, we can't leave out the various ministries. So for instance, it would the policy would be very clear in terms of the roles of the Ministry of Education, Ministries of Health, Social Welfare, Justice, or any other ministry that deals with the welfare of young people or children. Certainly would need to have clearly defined roles, and certainly this would speak to the sort of synergy that has to exist within those groupings, so that special and inclusive education can be successfully implemented. of course, we would have to look at the role of international organizations or donor agencies, the private sector, how awareness programs will be how they will be approached, how these international and private sector organizations will be made aware of what their roles and responsibilities are in terms of ensuring the success of the implementation of special and inclusive education, how these entities will be required to collaborate with, for example, the Ministry of Education in order to ensure the success of, or to ensure that inclusive and special education is successfully implemented. Certainly, we can't discard the role of the school and home communities, because our learners have to function within those contexts. So, of course, school and home communities will be considered to be very integral stakeholders in the entire process. Another group that would be considered would be non-profit and non-governmental organizations. And again, looking at the fact that the implementation of special and inclusive education doesn't necessarily or cannot be successful with just one entity doing all the work. There needs to be a lot of collaboration. There needs to be synergy among all of the relevant stakeholders to ensure that this is indeed successful. Okay, so I believe that we can move on to the various questions and comments. So thank you for your attention and participation.
Okay, we're going to try again for Melka. Are you still there? No, not hearing from Melka.
No.
All right, there are some questions in the chat. Joan, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, I think we start from Petra. Petra has two questions.
Yeah.
So her first question is at 6:40. So we can take that
I'm
one.
seeing one earlier.
You've seen one earlier than 6:40?
Yes. 21, Jessica. Since I joined late and the session was recorded, can it be emailed? That is a question that Edith Emmanuel would have to answer.
Oh, well, the session is being recorded. We have not circulated it into the public domain. Really, it has been for the consultant to synthesize and assist them in preparing an enhanced iteration of the document. If it is, however, something that may prove very useful to Petra, is it Petra or Jessica? Sorry. Then I suppose we can accommodate because we really value everyone's contribution to this process.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't want to hamper.
Okay, thank you. All right, from Petra, I noticed that it's a SEND policy with heavy emphasis on inclusion, with special schools being one of the placement options. My question, will special education schools benefit from all the perks and benefits given to regular schools, personal structure and everything? Petra, that's the intention, because special schools will have to step up its game for those children who must be placed in a special school. So therefore, whatever is necessary to enhance the education of youngsters placed there, they are a part of this consideration in terms of budgetary allocation, improvement of the facility, and so on. So most definitely, yes. Ian, how soon will this policy be in effect? Is there a timeline for implementation given all the different facets of this policy? As you would be well aware, something of this nature will take some time. So implementation will have to be planned over a number of years, so that the Department of Education, the government of St. Lucia, will now have to examine to see, okay, how do we phase in? What are the things that are immediate that we can finance? And let's say we have requested a 3-year projection. So year 1, year 2, year 3, but there may be other things that might go into a year 4. It depends on what the minister decides to do alongside the government of St. Lucia, because it also depends on funding and all of that. But there are many things that can begin right away, and we're helping to put together some guidelines for implementation through key performance indicators and so on to assist the implementation. There are some low-hanging fruits. Those can be done within the first year, second year, and so on. So it is hoped that within 3 years that most of the recommendations will be in effect. Some will take a little bit longer, because when you're talking about training of persons and degrees and so on, you might have to offer some scholarships and that sort of thing. So some things will take a longer time, but in terms of the policy, it should be going through the various stages before it gets legislated. I'm going to ask my colleague from the ministry to assist with any further comments. Well, let me just finish going through these, and then you can take it from there. Okay. Thank you sincerely for the opportunity to contribute to this very important consultation. Okay, Petra, again, when this policy becomes law, can anyone in the process choose not to accept the placement the parent assigned, such as a parent of, the assigned school that they're given? If yes, what would be the next step in the process? Well, as you know, parents even now have a right to appeal a decision. So their appeal would be heard. And I do believe that what is happening when it comes to the Education Act, which is a much broader act than this one, will speak to the fact that if a parent's appeal is not successful, what next in the best interest of this child? So that's a decision that the government of St. Lucia will have to take, because the interest of the child must always be maintained. So sometimes what it takes is parental education and so on, but they do have the right, even now, and as this comes into effect, they have the right to appeal a placement or appeal decisions made in terms of the diagnosis of the child and so on. But that appeal must be heard, and if unsuccessful, then the next steps would be with regard to what the state can do to ensure that the child's best interest is maintained. Jacqueline says, I do recognize the value in allowing students with special needs to remain in mainstream school. My questions are, does the policy speak to the assessment of these students? Yes, most definitely. Besides accommodations, what other adjustments will be considered? Well, it has to do with the type of equipment and material they may need. If it's a child with hearing impairment, what else other than sign language? What are the adaptive technologies out there that will assist this child, and so on? But there are other equipment and material, because at this stage of the game, things are so advanced in terms of what happens to persons who may be physically challenged, visually challenged, hearing impairments, and so on, that there are assistive technologies available that the ministry will have to invest in to ensure, alongside the parents, that the child is getting the best possible. Hearing aids have become, the technology has improved so much that there's a wealth of equipment and materials that can be acquired to accommodate these children. And also the curricula that is being used, and the training of the teachers to be able to deliver, and so on. What support will schools receive in terms of human resources to support these learners? We are advocating the special needs educators and the expansion of the multidisciplinary teams, so that if possible, down the road, that each district has a team or critical members of the team that can reach out to schools more rapidly than they're able to do now. Is there a clause to address timelines as it relates to reporting and the MDT process? Well, there has to be, with one small team serving the entire island, it becomes problematic. So we're advocating an expansion of the team with all the necessary persons there so that the assessment process can be can improve, the delivery of reports can be improved, and the implementation of individualized education programs will definitely improve once we have more persons whom we can access to get the job done. Can the assigned school appeal a placement? An assigned school can. I'm not sure about the use of the word appeal, but in the collaboration and discussion, a school may say, meet with the department to say, okay, you're putting this child in my school. I have no ramps. How will this child get around? What can we do together to make this happen? It's not just a total rejection, but it has to be, if you are putting this child in my school, which I have no objections to, what modifications to my physical plan must be made to ensure that this child is gonna fit in. If it is not to do with a physical restructuring and it has to do with other issues, we must sit at the table and discuss how appropriate this placement is going to be and what do I need as a principal and staff to ensure that the child is going to benefit from this placement. So I'm not sure it's an appeal to say, no, we can't have this child here. It is more a discussion about how we are going to facilitate the needs of this child so that the child's potential can be truly maximized. Those are the ones that I'm seeing right now. I welcome any comments from my colleagues from the Department of Education and if there's any member of the SEND team here today.
I think, Joan, we are actually out of time.
I do believe so.
I think we're out of time.
Oh, yes. I think we can probably invite the EO for Special Ed, Mr. Sergis, to speak briefly if there's anything that he would like to share at this point, and also will then defer to the EO for District 5, Mr. Jerif, who will close this meeting. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of the consultation again. I want to say thank you very much. I want to say thank you to the consultants for engaging with us again, for the work that you have done. Listening to the presentation each time it is done, I'm getting a clearer and clearer understanding that you understand our situation in St. Lucia, and we are looking eagerly forward to the implementation of this policy. I really want everybody to understand how much of a big deal this is. Other than the small section of the Education Act that speaks to special education, we do not have any guiding document for special education. I've heard many comments made, and I imagine that with a functioning policy, many of the situations described would not have obtained because we would have regulations governing those various issues. I also heard that there were a number of comments that were made. I would encourage people to make contact with the special education unit. If there are questions that you have about specific situations involving children, the special education unit is available to be contacted, and we can provide clarification concerning these situations. One other thing is that as I listen, I am realizing, Joan, and you can tell me whether or not the policy already speaks to that. It seems to me that one of the biggest issues that must be addressed is mindset, attitude, and disposition. I think that, you know, with physical resources, with training, these things are wonderful and necessary, but all of that can be derailed if people would not adopt a mindset towards inclusion, a mindset towards supporting the needs of children with special educational needs and disabilities. So with that, I want to thank you again for the work that you have done so far. I look forward to other consultations. I encourage persons who are on this call, if after you look through the document, there are other things that you discover or other thoughts that are generated that you have not expressed there, feel free to write it down, send it in, whether it is to the unit or to equip, so that that can be made available to the consultants. Thank you so much again.
Oh yes, and they're welcome, Mr. Sergis, to join tomorrow evening's consultation. We continue from 6 to 7:30 with District 7 and 8. Anyone on this call is welcome to join and really share your contributions there, should anything else come to mind. Thank you so much, Mr. Sergis and the JBTE team, the Joint Board of Teacher Education team. Mr. Jared?
Thank you, Ms. Emmanuel. Good night, colleagues. Good night to everyone. Let me say thank you again to our consultants and all those persons who participated in tonight's discussion. I must say I am very happy too, like Mr. Sergis, that we are seeing progress, we are seeing consideration being given to our special need students. And most of the concerns that we had, or some of the concerns that we've had, based on the policy before us, I can see at least attention is being given to some. For example, the human resource provision, the quantity and quality of teachers in the system, the infrastructural provision, we see the in-service training, differentiated instruction, the pre-service training as well. We see a curriculum from grade K to grade 5. We also see consideration being given to universal design for learning, the assessment accommodation. I think these are some of the concerns we've had for years as it pertains to attending to those students with special needs or disabilities, if I should use this word. Also, like Ms. James said earlier in her contribution, we are seeing an increase in persons coming to the schools, the public schools, or the general schools with needs. And if our teachers are trained, our teachers are able to, we get the necessary resources, there's a policy to guide our practice, then for sure, every child, everybody will get what is deserving. And so I really want to thank the team for what's happening. And of course, we look at the soonest for a policy that is functional and can contribute to the development of all involved. Of course, let me thank you, parents, teachers, community members, all those of you who've gathered here. We know tonight or today is a special day across the world, and for you to take the time out to be with us, it's very much appreciated. And so on behalf of Districts 5 and 6, we say thank you and do have a blessed night. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sheriff, and thank you so much for teachers, parents, community members. I cannot say enough thanks or express, thanks to you for that. It's Valentine's Day and you made this time to be with us. So thank you so much. We are eternally grateful. Enjoy the rest of your Valentine's night, everyone. Good night.
Good night, Miss
Thank you,
Iman.
everyone.
Good night. Good night.
Good night. Good night.